I had settled into the quiet rhythm of Widwood on the edge of the village, waking before dawn to feed the donkeys and tend the small garden behind my modest house. Arrived unannounced from the city, he stood at my door with a small bag, saying he needed a place to stay while he sorted some family matters. His voice was low, almost apologetic, but his eyes, they lingered a second too long on the thin shawl it had thrown over my shoulders. That first evening, as I bent over the low wooden tub washing clothes, he walked in without knocking. The door creaks awfully behind him. He stood too close, the heat of his body brushing my back while the scent of fresh hay and his faint sweat filled the air, mixing with the sharp soap. My hands froze in the soapy water. Shameful awareness of how long it had been since any man had been this near. I could feel the warmth radiating from him like the sun on dry earth after rain. Why didn't I straighten up? Why did I stay bent there, breathing shallow, pretending I hadn't noticed? He cleared his throat, murmured something about helping, but his shadow fell over the tub and stayed. The next morning we shared breakfast at the scarred wooden table. Gian insisted on helping carry the heavy water buckets for the donkeys. His calloused fingers accidentally grazed mine as we set the pails down, sending a jolt through me, sharp as lightning in dry grass. I pulled back too quickly, spilling a little water on the ground. "It's nothing," I told myself, voice steady on the outside while inside I whispered, "It's your husband's blood." Stop noticing the way his shirt clings when he sweats, the way the fabric darkens across his chest. The distant bray of a donkey seemed to mock my racing pulse, echoing like laughter I didn't deserve. I poured tea with trembling hands, watching steam curl between us. He smiled, small and careful, and thanked me for letting him stay. The words felt heavier than they should, pressing against the silence in the room. I kept my eyes on the table, on the worn wood, on anything but the line of his jaw or the way his throat moved when he swallowed. Days blurred into evenings of shared chores. I taught him how to mix the donkey feed while he stood behind me in the cramped shed, his chest occasionally pressing against my shoulder as he reached for the grain sack. Each time our bodies touched, even for a second, warmth spread low in my belly, slow and insistent like honey spilling. I rationalized it as simple helpfulness. Family helping family, yet every night I lay awake replaying the texture of his rough cotton shirt against my thin blouse, fighting the guilt that whispered I was betraying my husband's memory. The shed smelled of dry straw and earth, close and intimate. His breath brushed the back of my neck once when he leaned in to steady the sack. I forgot how to breathe for a moment, the air turning thick, heavy. This is wrong, I thought, even as my skin prickled with unwelcome heat. He stepped back quickly, apologizing under his breath, but the space between us felt charged, electric, like the air before a storm rolls in over the fields. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted everything gold, we worked side by side again. His arm brushed mine, reaching for the same measure of feed. Neither of us moved away right away. The contact lingered, warm fabric against warm fabric against warm fabric, and I felt my pulse in my throat, loud enough I wondered if he could hear it too. The donkeys shifted in their pens, restless, as if they sensed the tension thickening the air around us. I told myself it was the heat of the day, the long hours, nothing more. But lying in bed later, staring at the dark ceiling, I could still feel the ghost of that touch on my shoulder, the way it had made something inside me stir. Hungry and ashamed. How long had it been since anyone made me feel seen? Alive in that way? Gian was family. He was here for practical reasons. I repeated it like a prayer, but the words felt thin, dissolving in the dark. And yet, when morning came, I found myself listening for his footsteps in the yard, my heart quickening before I even saw him. The chores kept pulling us together, again and again. In the narrow space of the shed, his presence felt larger than the room allowed. I caught myself wondering what his hands would feel like if they stayed longer, but hated myself for the thought. The guilt sat heavy in my chest, but it didn't stop the ache from blooming. Quiet and persistent, like vines creeping over old stone walls. I kept my distance when I could, bussying my hands. One humid afternoon we sat mending clothes on the narrow porch, the wooden boards creaking under our weight. Giannesni brushed mine beneath the low table and stayed there, warm and solid through the thin fabric of my skirt. My breath caught sharp in my throat. Inside my head the voices clashed like distant thunder. Hes grieving too. This is only comfort, nothing more. But God, the steady pressure of his leg felt like slow fire licking low in my belly. I should have pulled away first. I didn't. Not right away. The faint scent of his soap clung to my skin afterward, an accusation I secretly welcomed, carrying it with me like a stolen secret. I told myself it meant nothing. Family helping family. Yet every time our eyes met over the needle and thread, something inside me tightened, a hunger I had no right to feel. The village wind stirred the leaves overhead, but it cowled cool the flush creeping up my neck. Jean kept his gaze on the torn shirt in his hands, but his knee never moved. Not until I finally shifted, cheeks burning, pretending to reach for more thread. The absence of that touch left a cold hollow where heat had been. He started bringing small gifts from the market then, heavy and fragrant in my palm, a new brush for the donkeys, its bristles soft against my fingers. Each offering felt heavier than it should, like quiet promises wrapped in ordinary kindness. After supper we would sit under the lantern light with rice wine, the sweet sharp taste loosening my tongue until words slipped out too easily. When an old village song drifted from a neighbor's radio, soft and aching, his hand rested lightly on my lower back as we swayed, just a little. That rough warmth through the thin dress anchored itself deep in my memory, helping me ache with a longing so forbid a night ride to drown it in another slow sip of wine. The wine only made everything worse. It blurred the edges of guilt until the line between right and wrong felt distant, hazy. I caught myself leaning into that hand on my back, just for a heartbeat, before shame yanked me upright. Gian's fingers lingered a second longer than necessary, as if he'd felt the pull. Neither of us spoke of it. The lantern flame flickered between us, casting shadows that danced close on the walls. Point twilight in the kitchen, we were alone again. He stepped close to reach for a bowl on the high shelf above me, our hips aligned for one dangerous second. I felt the hard outline of him through our clothes, and a soft gasp escaped before I could swallow it. Heat flooded my face. The air turned thick, breathless. Just then the neighbor woman's voice called from the gate, sharp and cheerful, asking about donkey medicine for her lame one. We sprang apart like guilty children, hearts hammering loud enough to drown the evening crickets. I turned quickly to the stove, hands trembling as I stirred the pot, relief and cruel disappointment twisting together inside me until I cowled and tell them apart. That interruption left me trembling long after she left. I kept replaying the brief press of our bodies, the way my pulse had jumped, the sudden hunger that had flared so bright it scared me. Gian moved around the kitchen with careful distance now, but the space between us still hummed with everything unsaid. I busied my hands washing bowls, focusing on the cool water, yet every glance toward him brought back that dangerous second when nothing had happened. And everything almost had. Later that night I lay awake listening to the donkeys shift in their pens outside. The ache refused to fade. I pressed my thighs together under the thin sheet, ashamed of how easily my body remembered the shape of him. He was my husband's younger brother, blood, family. The words circled like warnings in the dark, yet they only made the craving sharper, sweeter, more impossible to ignore. How much longer could I pretend this was only shared chores and quiet kindness? The question hung there, unanswered, pulling me toward the next day with a force I both feared and craved. The following evening the gifts continued, another peach left on the table like an offering. When our fingers brushed reaching for the same cup, the contact lingered again, warm and deliberate this time. I didn't pull away immediately. Neither did he. The rice wine waited nearby, promising to blur the edges once more. My heart raced with the terrible knowledge that each small moment was building toward something neither of us could name. And I wasn't sure I wanted to stop it anymore. I heard the whispers first from the old auntie at the market, her voice low and sharp like a hidden thorn. Gian had been seen lingering near the young widow's gate down the lane, their heads bent close over some shared concern, or so the story went. Sharper than intended, cutting through the quiet braying, he caught my wrist gently, fingers warm and steady, pulling me just close enough that the space between us vanished into heat. "Are you jealous, sister-in-law?" he murmured, breath brushing my ear like a secret too heavy to carry alone. The question landed low in my stomach, stirring something angry and thrilling that made my pulse tumble. I wanted to deny it, to pull free and laugh it off as village nonsense, but my body betrayed me with a tremble I couldn't hide. His eyes held mine too long, dark and knowing, while the donkeys shifted restlessly behind us. The shame burned hot across my cheeks, yet I didn't step back right away. Part of me wondered if he wanted me to feel this twist, this ugly little hunger that had no right to exist between us. He was family, my husband's blood, here only to settle matters that should have stayed buried. Yet the way his thumb traced once over my pulse point felt like a promise wrapped in danger. I finally twisted away, heart hammering, muttering something about checking the water troughs, but the accusation lingered between us like smoke from a dying fire. That night the rain started soft, then built into a steady drum on the roof. We sat on the worn floor cushions with too much rice wine between us, the bottle passing slower each time. Stories of my late husband spilled out and widened, tears following the words until my voice cracked. Jian leaned in, his thumb brushing the wetness from my cheek with a gentleness that undid me. His face hovered inches from mine, the scent of wet earth and warm skin wrapping around us like invisible arms. "He would want you looked after," he whispered, voice rough at the edges. Inside my head, the war raged louder than the storm outside. "This is wrong. He's family, stop before it breaks everything." But my body leaned closer anyway, craving the solid comfort of him, the way his presence filled the empty spaces grief had carved. Guilt clawed sharp at my chest even as the wine softened its grip, making the line between solace and something deeper blur into haze. His breath mingled with mine, warm and unsteady, carrying the faint trace of rice wine and unspoken want. The power flickered out suddenly, plunging the house into darkness broken only by lightning flashes. We grabbed candles and hurried to the barn to check on the donkeys, rain soaking through our clothes in minutes. In the flickering light, his hand found my waist to steady me over the uneven straw-strewn ground. It stayed there, fingers slowly tracing the curve through the damp fabric of my dress, each small movement sending sparks slow and deep. Every breath pulled us nearer until I could feel the steady thud of his heartbeat against my back, strong and alive. Desire roared louder than the pounding rain on the tin roof. I told myself just this once, no further, even as my own hand covered his for a heartbeat, pressing it closer instead of pushing away. The warmth of his palm burned through the thin, wet material, anchoring me in a moment that felt suspended outside time and duty. The donkeys watched with quiet eyes, their breathing steady while mine came shallow and quick. I turned my head slightly, lips parted on words I couldn't quite form, the almost touch hanging between us like a storm about to break. We made it back inside soaked and shivering, the candle flames dancing wild shadows across the walls. He wrapped a single blanket around both of us, our bodies pressed fully together for warmth under the thin cover. His lips brushed my ear as he said my name, low and rough like gravel under bare feet. My hands clutched the front of his wet shirt, fingers twisting the fabric, pulling him nearer without meaning to. The space between our mouths shrank to nothing and everything at once, breaths mingling hot and sweet with wine and rain. And then, the village headman's fist hammered the door again, sharp and insistent, slicing through the charged air like cold water thrown on embers. "Open up, flood warnings, the river's rising fast." His voice boomed, dragging us back from that trembling brink where everything had narrowed to heat and breath and the impossible pull between us. I shoved against Jian's chest, my palms flat against the damp fabric, feeling the rapid thud of his heart matching my own frantic rhythm. Shame flooded me hot and immediate, burning up my neck and cheeks as I stumbled backward, the blanket slipping to pool at our feet. What had I almost done? He was my husband's brother, the man sleeping under the same roof only because blood tied us in ways that should have kept us safe, distant. Yet my body still hummed with the ghost of his nearness, every nerve alight and accusing. "Sister-in-law," Jian's voice came rough, low, his hand reaching halfway toward me before he let it drop. His eyes held mine in the candlelight, dark with the same storm that raged inside me, want warring with the weight of what we owed the dead and the living both. I turned away, wrapping my arms around myself, the wet dress clinging cold now where his warmth had been. "We should answer him," I whispered, the words trembling out like a confession I couldn't take back. My lips still tingled from the almost kiss, from the way his breath had brushed them like a promise I had no right to crave. Inside, the voices clashed louder than the rain. "Stop this. You can't." But oh, how I wanted to lean back into that gravity, Let it pull me under, the headman kept shouting, his lantern swinging outside, casting frantic shadows through the cracks. Gian moved first, unlocking the door with stiff movements, his shoulders tense under the flickering light. I stayed in the corner, listening to their low exchange-abouts and bags and rising waters, my mind replaying the feel of his fingers on my waist. The way they had traced slow circles that spoke of hunger neither of us named. When the door finally shut and the headman's boots faded into the downpour, silence settled heavy between us. Gian stood there, rain dripping from his hair, eyes searching mine across the small room. Neither of us spoke of the almost. The blanket lay forgotten, a silent witness to how close we had come to shattering the fragile line of family and duty. Later, alone in my narrow bed, I pressed my fingers to my lips where his breath had lingered like smoke. The scent of hay and rain and him still clung to my skin, stubborn and sweet, refusing to wash away with the storm. Relief should have come. Nothing had happened, the interruption a mercy from the gods or fate or whatever watched over widows like me. But instead an emptiness yawned wide, cold and aching, where that near touch had promised fire. I curled tighter under the thin quilt, listening to the rain ease into drips, wondering if he lay awake too, fighting the same pull. Dawn crept in gray and hesitant, finding me in the donkey pen with brush in hand, strokes unsteady over their rough coats. The animals shifted patiently, their warm breaths puffing soft clouds in the cool air. Oblivious to the tension coiling in my chest, Gian appeared in the doorway, silent at first, just watching with those eyes that carried last night's weight. We moved through the morning chores without words, the buckets, the feed, the quiet braying that filled the spaces we couldn't. Every glance felt loaded, every accidental brush of shoulders in the cramped shed sending fresh sparks low and deep. The air crackled with everything unsaid, the jealousy from village whispers, the comfort that had blurred into craving, the storm that had almost broken us open. By midday the sun broke through, drying the mud but not the residue inside me. I caught him looking when he thought I wouldn't notice, his gaze tracing the curve of my neck where his lips had hovered. My pulse jumped in answer, shameful and alive, reminding me how long Woodwood had left me parched for this kind of nearness. As evening shadows lengthened across the yard, I stood at the gate feeding the last scraps to the donkeys, their gentle nudges grounding me even as my thoughts drifted back to that blanket-trapped moment. Gian lingered nearby, mending a harness with slow, deliberate hands. The village stirred to life around us. Distant calls, the scent of cooking fires, but between us stretched an invisible thread, taut and trembling. How long could we keep pretending the line hadn't shifted, that the almost hadn't changed the shape of every shared silence, every helpful touch now laced with dangerous memory? Part of me longed to cross it fully, to surrender to the gravity that pulled us despite blood and grief and watchful eyes. Another part whispered of ruin, of becoming the widow the village would whisper about in harsher tones. The donkeys bray-ed low as the sun dipped, their calls echoing my unsettled heart. Gian's shadow fell beside mine on the ground, close but not touching. I didn't turn. Nothing resolved, only this lingering hunger, this haunting what if that would follow me through quiet mornings and restless nights in our shared house. Wondering if the next storm would finally break us, or if we'd keep circling the edge until it consumed us both.